My family told everyone I was dead until my twin sister got sick and needed my organs. I'm 30 but my life took a turn most people wouldn't believe when I was just 6. My twin sister, Emma, and I grew up in a struggling household. Money was always tight, and our parents constantly stressed about bills. But even as a kid, I could tell that things weren't the same for both of us. Emma always got better toys, more attention, softer words. If one of us got in trouble, it was always me. If one of us needed something, she got it first. At first, I didn't question it. She was my twin, my best friend. I figured this was just how families worked. But looking back, the signs were all there. Then, one day, everything changed. It was summer, and our parents sat us down. They told me I was going to visit my grandfather for a little while. Just for the summer, they said, it would be fun. Grandpa would spoil me, and they would be back before I knew it. I was excited. A whole summer with Grandpa, no rules, no fights over toys, no getting scolded for things that Emma did first sounded good to me. I packed a small bag. My parents drove me to Grandpa's house, a small cozy place a few hours away. They stayed for dinner, acted like everything was normal, and the next morning they were gone. I counted the days, 1 week, 2 weeks, 3. I started asking Grandpa when they were coming back. He kept saying soon, but then I saw the worry in his face, the way he hesitated before answering. And finally, one evening, he sat me down at the kitchen table and told me the truth. They're not coming back. I didn't understand. How could they just leave? Didn't they say it was only for the summer? Grandpa tried to comfort me, saying that I would always have a home with him, but all I could focus on was the emptiness. I waited for a phone call, a letter, a visit, nothing. Eventually, I stopped waiting. Life with Grandpa was different, but it was good. He wasn't rich, but he was kind. He made sure I had food, clothes, and a roof over my head. He didn't treat me like an extra mouth to feed or a burden. I was just his grandson, and that was enough for him. Over the years, I caught glimpses of Emma's life through relatives, through whispers. She was thriving. Private schools, vacations, a new house in another state. She had everything. And me, I had a second-hand winter coat and part-time jobs before I was even a teenager. The real gut punch came when I was 15. That's when I found out that my parents hadn't just left me behind. They had erased me. They had moved across the country and told everyone they had one daughter. No one knew I existed. No old pictures, no stories, nothing. They had rewritten reality to fit their perfect little family. That was the moment I stopped wondering why they left. I had my answer. By the time I turned 18, I had no more illusions. They had chosen their life without me, and I wasn't going to waste my time chasing after people who had made it clear I wasn't wanted. When I was 22, Grandpa passed away. It was the hardest moment of my life, but I pushed through. I worked, saved, built my own life. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Then out of nowhere, a name I hadn't seen in decades popped up on my phone screen, Emma, a friend request. I stared at it for a long time. It felt like a ghost had reached out from the past. I debated ignoring it, but curiosity won. I clicked one message. We need to talk. It's important. I didn't know what to think. Why now? What could she possibly want? I hadn't spoken to her in years. I debated blocking her. But then, against my better judgment, I replied, "What do you want?" The answer came almost instantly. "Mom and Dad want to see you. They want to reconnect." I should have left it at that. Should have shut the door and never looked back. But something about it gnawed at me. I didn't want them back in my life. I didn't need their apologies, but I needed to know why. So I said yes. I agreed to meet them, and I had no idea just how insane their real reason was. I agreed to meet them, not because I wanted to forgive them, not because I was curious about their lives, but because I needed to hear it from their own mouths. I needed to know why. After all these years, they suddenly wanted to reconnect. Emma sent the location, a high-end restaurant in the city. The kind of place where a single meal probably cost what I used to make in a week. The kind of place my parents wouldn't have taken me to even if I had grown up with them. I arrived on time. They were already there. Emma was the first to notice me. She smiled, waved me over. She looked like someone who had never struggled a day in her life. Nice clothes, expensive watch, confident posture. My mother sat beside her, forcing a wide smile, but her eyes darted nervously. My father, on the other hand, didn't even look up. I sat down. The air was thick with tension. The kind of tension you get when people are pretending everything is fine when it really isn't. The first few minutes were small talk, forced pleasantries. My mother kept saying how much I had grown up. My father still wouldn't look at me. Emma, though, seemed genuine. She told me she was glad I came, that she had wanted to reach out sooner. But before she could say more, my mother cut in. She sighed, clasped her hands together, and launched into what was clearly a rehearsed speech. She talked about regret, about how hard things had been, about how they had always loved me, even if their actions didn't show it. And then she got to the real reason we were there. Emma was sick, a serious condition. She needed a matching donor, and as her identical twin, I was the best possible match. That was it. That was the reason for the sudden interest in me after 30 years. Not because they missed me, not because they cared, because they needed something. I sat there, letting the words settle. My mother's eyes welled up with tears. She called me their only hope. My father, still refusing to meet my eyes, muttered something about how it was the least I could do. Emma, to her credit, looked uncomfortable. She admitted she didn't know how badly they had cut me off, that she always assumed they at least kept in touch. My mother went on about how we were still family, how the past didn't matter now, how they just wanted a second chance. And then, as if she had been waiting for the perfect moment, she pulled out a small envelope, slid it across the table. I opened it. Old baby photos, pictures of me and Emma as infants, as toddlers, side by side, pictures of a life before they threw me away. The manipulation was so obvious, it was almost insulting. I put the envelope down and finally spoke. I laid it all out. The abandonment, the silence, the lies, the fact that they had erased me from their lives so completely that they told people I never existed. I asked if they would have ever reached out if Emma hadn't gotten sick. Silence. My mother's lip trembled. My father finally looked up. His expression was flat, unreadable. Then he spoke. He said I had a good life with my grandfather, that I shouldn't hold grudges, that we all make mistakes. I laughed, actually laughed. Emma, meanwhile, looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. She tried to defend them, said it wasn't that simple, that they did what they thought was best at the time. I asked if they had ever even once tried to check on me, if they had ever wondered how I was doing. More silence, and then my mother broke down. Tears, shaking hands, sobbing about how she regretted everything, how she knew they had made mistakes. But I was their son, and Emma was my sister, and wasn't family supposed to be there for each other? That was the final straw. I stood up, told them I needed time to think, walked out before they could say anything else. Emma followed me outside. She said she understood if I never wanted to see them again, but she was sorry. She said she didn't want to pressure me, but her life was on the line. She asked me to at least consider it. I didn't respond, just walked away. Later that night, I vented online. I didn't say it was me, just laid out the situation in a post. The responses were mixed. Some people said, family is family. You only get one sister. Others said, they abandoned you. You owe them nothing. I already knew where I stood, but I wasn't done yet. This wasn't over. After the disaster of that meeting, I went straight to my best friend's place. I laid everything out, the sudden reconnection, the guilt tripping, the way my parents had erased me from their lives until they needed something from me. My friend didn't hold back. The reaction was immediate, outrage, disbelief. How could they throw me away like trash, then waltz back in, acting like nothing happened, and then expect me to risk my life for them? That conversation cemented something in me. This wasn't just messed up. It was calculated. So I started digging. I researched Emma's condition, expecting to find that she was truly out of options. Instead, I found that while her situation was serious, it wasn't as dire as my parents had claimed. A transplant was an option, but not the only one. She had alternatives, other treatments that could buy her time my parents weren't willing to wait for. That's when I realized this wasn't about urgency. This wasn't a desperate last resort plea to save her life. This was them taking the easiest way out. The next few days, the messages started. My mother was relentless. Every morning, another text, another voicemail, another guilt trip. You're her only hope. Don't do this to your own sister. We can fix things. Be a family again. They escalated fast. Missed calls turned into paragraphs of emotional blackmail. Then came the baby pictures again. Then, the long rambling voicemails about how much they regretted everything. Emma reached out separately. Her tone was different. She wasn't begging, just apologizing. saying she understood if I said no, that she didn't want me to feel forced. But something about that felt off too, so I kept digging. I reached out to an old relative, someone who had been on the outskirts of the family drama for years. That's when I learned the truth. My parents had planned to abandon me before I was even born. According to this relative, before my mother gave birth, she and my father had talked about how they only wanted one child. Raising twins would be too hard, especially with their financial struggles. But when we were born, they kept both of us. For a while, the favoritism started immediately. Emma got the attention, the affection, the investment, and I was extra. They had always planned to leave me behind. They just needed to figure out when. That summer trip to Grandpa's. It wasn't a last-minute decision. It wasn't a tough choice they made under pressure. It was the plan all along. That was bad enough. But what came next? That was worse. I reached out to an aunt I barely spoke to anymore. I asked if she knew anything about how my parents explained my absence over the years. She hesitated. Then she told me, they told people I had died. At least, that was the story they crafted for their new social circle. For old friends and distant family, they simply avoided the subject. They got rid of my pictures, stopped mentioning me, and over time, I faded from existence in their world. If anyone asked, they brushed it off. It wasn't that they had erased me overnight. They had rewritten history slowly piece by piece. That's why none of their friends knew about me. That's why there were no pictures. That's why Emma had never questioned it. They erased me. I needed to see it for myself. I found my parents' social media accounts, and sure enough, there was no trace of me. Their posts stretched back years, filled with updates on Emma's accomplishments, their new house, their vacations, no other son, no mentions of the past. I scrolled through post after post looking for anything, a picture, a comment, a throwback post, nothing. They had rewritten history. And now they didn't just want my organ. They wanted me to take Emma's place if she died. I sat with that for a long time before I picked up my phone and called them. The second my mother answered, she was already emotional, talking fast, trying to control the conversation. She kept saying she knew I was hurt, but I needed to look past that we had a second chance to be a family. I cut her off. I told her I knew everything. The abandonment, the lies, the fake story about my death, the fact that they had been planning this since day one. She didn't deny it. She just stumbled over her words, saying they did what they had to do. My father chimed in, his voice steady. He said, "We did what was best, not for me, just best for them." I told them to stop pretending this was about family. They never wanted me back until they needed something. Then I asked the final question. If Emma weren't sick, would they have ever reached out? Silence. That silence told me everything I needed to know. I hung up, and now I had a choice to make. Walk away forever or burn the bridge completely. After that phone call, I was done. No more back and forth. No more letting them pull me into their mess. I blocked my parents on everything. Calls, texts, social media. I didn't just want distance. I wanted them out of my life completely. Emma was the last one I hadn't blocked. Not yet. Her messages were different from theirs. Less manipulative, more regretful, but it didn't change the fact that she had been part of the life I was erased from, the life where I had been written out like I never existed. Before I could make a decision about her, my phone rang. It was my aunt, one of the few extended family members I still spoke to. She didn't waste time. She had heard about what happened, and she had a warning. My parents were furious, not just upset, furious. They weren't going to let this go. They were telling anyone who would listen that I was a selfish, heartless person who had turned his back on his own twin sister. She told me they were reaching out to the rest of the family, twisting the story to make it sound like I was the one abandoning them. I barely had time to process that before another message came in. This time from Emma, it was short. She apologized again, said she didn't blame me if I never wanted to speak to her again. She said she had no idea how badly our parents had treated me, that she had only recently found out just how deep the lies went. I didn't respond. I blocked her number. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. The next day, I started getting messages from family members I barely spoke to. Cousins, distant relatives, people I hadn't seen in years. Some of them were angry, repeating the same story my parents had told them, how I had abandoned my family when they needed me most. Others weren't so quick to take sides. They asked questions, wanted to hear my side, and then, something I didn't expect, some of them defended me. Some relatives outright called out my parents. They reminded them loudly and publicly that I was the one who had been abandoned first, that my parents had left me behind by choice and ignored me for almost 3 decades. That threw a wrench in their narrative, so they switched tactics. The next thing I heard, they were telling people I hadn't been abandoned, just sent somewhere better, that they had done what was best for me, that they had always planned to bring me back into the family, but circumstances got in the way. It was complete nonsense. I ignored it, until my manager called me into his office. He looked uncomfortable, like he didn't want to have the conversation he was about to have. My mother had called my workplace, weaving a dramatic story about a family emergency. My manager caught off guard, took down her number, but didn't pass it to me immediately. When I explained the situation, how I had been abandoned and was only being contacted now for selfish reasons, he understood. He told the receptionist to block any further calls from them. When he asked for details, she got vague, saying it was about a medical crisis and that I was making a huge mistake. He hadn't given her any information, but he wanted to know what was going on. I told him the truth, at least the basic version of it, that my parents had cut me off decades ago and were only reaching out now for selfish reasons. He nodded, said he wouldn't let them harass me at work, and told the receptionist not to take any more calls from them. But now it was clear, blocking them wasn't enough. They were going to force their way back into my life if I didn't put up stronger barriers. I reached out to a lawyer friend. I wanted to know, could they force me to donate? Could they take legal action? The answer was no. They couldn't make me do anything, but my friend warned me. They might try to manipulate the situation, emotional pressure, social pressure, even legal threats, just to scare me into compliance. I needed to be ready. Then out of nowhere, a mutual friend sent me a message. Emma had reached out to them. She told them she had no idea our parents were harassing me. She said she hadn't been told about the calls, the family smear campaign, or the workplace interference. She was furious. A few hours later, I got an email from her. She said she was done with them, that after hearing about what they had been doing, she confronted them, asked them why they were going this far, why they were trying to force my hand. They deflected, made excuses, but in the end, they admitted the truth. At first, they showered me with guilt-tripping messages, reminiscing about how I was still their son and how family sticks together. But when I didn't fall for it, their desperation escalated. I wasn't just a donor to them. I was their backup plan, their second attempt at the perfect son. That was it for her. She told me she was cutting ties, that she understood why I didn't want anything to do with them, that she wouldn't reach out again unless I wanted her to. I didn't respond. I just sat there reading the email over and over again. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the only one walking away from them. And for the first time, they were completely truly alone. Blocking them didn't stop them. Cutting them off didn't stop them. Even Emma walking away didn't stop them. They were still trying to control the story. Family members I hadn't spoken to in years were reaching out, either demanding answers or trying to guilt me. Some believed the version of events my parents had spread, that I was heartless, that I was letting my own twin suffer. Others wanted to know the truth, whisper-mag that they had always suspected something was off about my parents' story. I was done letting them twist things. So I exposed everything. I wrote it all down, every detail. The favoritism, the abandonment, the way they erased me from their lives, how they told people I had died, how they only reached out when they needed my body. I didn't post it under my real name, but I made sure the right people saw it. And once the truth was out, it spread fast. Relatives who thought I had been dead for decades lost it. Some reached out in complete disbelief, asking if I was actually alive. Others confronted my parents directly, demanding answers, and then their real nightmare began. Their friends saw it. Their neighbors saw it. People they had spent years lying to, building a perfect image for, suddenly weren't so sure about them anymore. And the worst part, they had no defense. They had no pictures of me. No stories. Nothing to prove that I had been a real part of their lives because as far as they were concerned, I never existed. Their perfect life fell apart. It didn't take long before Emma reached out again. This time from a new number. She had seen the post. She had seen the reaction. At first, she struggled to accept it. Part of her still clung to the belief that our parents couldn't have been that cruel. But as more details surfaced and old family members confirmed my side, denial turned to anger. She had spent weeks trying to justify their actions, only to realize there was no excuse, and that destroyed her. But the family was split. Some relatives took my side immediately, shocked by what they had never known. They had assumed my absence was a quiet estrangement, not a full erasure. Others, who had known bits and pieces but had never questioned it, struggled with guilt, and then there were those who still pushed the tired excuse. But they're still your parents, as if biology alone made up for decades of abandonment. And then came my parents' response. Not an apology. Not an explanation. Pure blind outrage. They called me a traitor, said I had betrayed the family by airing private family matters, that I was making them look bad for no reason. They weren't mad about what they had done. They were mad about being caught, but that wasn't the worst part. A few days later, a cousin reached out. They had overheard something during a heated argument between my parents and another family member. It wasn't just about the donation. They needed money. Emma's treatment wasn't cheap. Insurance wasn't cover-mag everything. They had assumed I would not only agree to the surgery, but also help pay for it. That's why they pushed so hard. That's why they were trying to force me back into the family. I wasn't just a donor to them. I was a wallet. Emma found out around the same time I did, and that was her breaking point. She confronted them. She demanded to know if they had only reached out because they needed something. If they had ever really planned to let her reconnect with me as her brother, or if I was just a backup plan. They dodged the question. They refused to answer. That was enough for her. She told them she was done. And then a few days later, I got a letter, a formal cease and desist from a lawyer. They were trying to shut me up. It was nonsense, of course. Nothing in my post was a lie. They couldn't force me to stop talking, but it was their last desperate attempt to control the situation. I ignored it. My own lawyer confirmed they had no case. That's when they played their final card. They told extended family that if Emma died, it would be my fault. That was the last straw. Emma publicly disowned them. She put it all in writing. She posted her own message, making it clear. She wanted nothing to do with them. They had destroyed their own family, not me. And with that, their final lifeline was gone. Their golden child, their only daughter, the one they had chosen over me, she was done with them too. And for the first time in my life, the guilt, the weight I had carried for years, Wanda Mag, if I should have tried harder, if I should have done more, it finally disappeared. I didn't owe them anything, and now they had nothing. After Emma publicly disowned them, everything should have been over. They had no more power, no more control, no more excuses. But instead of finally accepting the consequences of their actions, my parents did what they always did. They doubled down. It started with an email. My mother suddenly very sick. Terminal, she claimed. She needed to see me one last time before it was too late. The wording was dramatic, full of regret, of pain, of wanting to make amends before she left this world. At first, I ignored it, but then doubt crept in. Could it be real? Could she actually be dying? As much as I hated them, the idea of her actually being sick was something I had to at least consider. Before I made a decision, I reached out to Emma. She didn't even hesitate. It was a lie. She was perfectly fine. No hospital visits. No medical emergencies. No diagnosis. It was just another tactic. Another guilt trip. And it wasn't just me she was targeting. Within hours of that email, I started seeing the Facebook posts, long rambling paragraphs about how her own son had abandoned her in her final days, how she had tried so hard to be forgiven, how I was cruel and cold-hearted for refusing to see her even as she was dying. The comments were a mixed bag. Some people bought into it, offering sympathy and outrage on her behalf. Others weren't so convinced. The truth had already spread too far, and plenty of people called her out. She didn't stop. A few days later, another message. This time from my father, short, blunt, straight to the point. I hope you can live with yourself if Emma dies. That was it. That was their last move. Trying to dump all the responsibility onto me as if I hadn't been erased from their family decades ago. I didn't respond. I didn't need to, but that wasn't the end of it. They weren't satisfied with just emails and Facebook rants, so they showed up at my workplace. Security caught them before they could get inside. My mother was in full dramatic mode, crying, pleading, trying to get past the front desk. My father stood next to her, playing the silent disappointed act, like he was just a poor man watching his family fall apart. They demanded to see me. Security refused. They caused a scene. They got kicked off the property. And just like that, their last stand crumbled. After that, things got worse. For them, their smear campaign backfired. The more they pushed, the more people started turning against them. People who had once defended them, who had believed their lies, began to question everything. Neighbors, family, friends, even some of the relatives who had initially taken their side started pulling away. Because at the end of the day, they couldn't escape the one truth that ruined them. They had abandoned their child. They had chosen their golden daughter, erased the other, and only came crawling back when they needed something. Now they had nothing. Word spread that they were struggling. Their finances had never been as stable as they pretended. Between their lavish spending and medical bills, the cracks had already been forming. With Emma cutting them off and no one left to manipulate, they had no choice. They moved away, hoping to start fresh somewhere else. No dramatic goodbyes, no last messages. They simply disappeared from the community they had spent years pretending to be perfect in. And Emma reached out one final time, not to ask for anything, not to apologize, just to tell me that she was moving forward. She was focusing on alternative treatments, doing everything she could to fight her condition without them dragging her down. She told me that she finally understood that no matter how much she had been favored, it had never really been about love. It had always been about control. That was the last time we spoke. And for the first time in my life, I had true freedom. No more messages. No more manipulation. No more guilt. I deleted their numbers, blocked every possible contact, and then I moved on. I thought it was over. They had moved away. Their lies had collapsed. Emma had disowned them. Their manipulation tactics had failed. But people like them, they don't just give up. It started with a voicemail, an unfamiliar number, a law firm. The message was formal, cold, something about urgent legal matters related to my parents. No details. No explanations. Just a number to call back immediately. I didn't panic. I had dealt with enough of their nonsense to know this was just another attempt to pull me back in. Still, I forwarded the voicemail to my lawyer. It didn't take long for him to confirm it. A baseless scare tactic. There was no real legal issue. They had nothing on me, but they were trying to make it sound serious enough to scare me into responding. I ignored it. That's when they escalated. Days later, my lawyer called me again. This time with actual documents. A lawsuit. According to my parents, I was cruelly abandoning Emma in her time of need. They filed a frivolous lawsuit, knowing full well they had no legal standing, but hoping the threat alone would pressure me into compliance. It was ridiculous. It had no legal standing, but it wasn't about winning. It was about pressure. They wanted to force me into the conversation to make me engage. My lawyer wasted no time shutting it down. He filed a cease and desist, warning them that if they continued this harassment, they could face legal consequences. That should have been enough. But then Emma found out, and she lost it. She confronted them, not just in private, but in public. For years, she had ignored the red flags. She had believed their version of the story, the softened, watered-down lies they had fed her. But this was too far. She didn't just call them out. She exposed everything. She wrote a post detailing the truth, how they abandoned me, how they erased me from their lives, how they only reached out when they needed something. She told everyone that the lawsuit was a lie, that she had never asked them to do it, that this wasn't about helping her. It was about control, and that was it. The final straw, their last defenders, the few people who still believed them, vanished. The last pieces of their reputation crumbled. Even the law firm backed out. I got a call from my lawyer the next morning. The lawsuit had been dropped quietly overnight. They knew they had lost, but they still had one last move, a final email, the subject line, one last chance. It was long, dramatic, full of emotional manipulation. She told me she would forgive me if I just fixed things, if I just helped bring the family back together, if I just understood how much they loved me. I didn't read past the first paragraph. I deleted it. And for the first time, they had nothing left. Emma messaged me one last time. She told me that she was done with them, truly, that she wasn't just cutting them off. She was moving forward without them hanging over her life. She was exploring alternative treatments. She was taking control of her own health without their influence, without their pressure. She told me she wouldn't ask for help again, and that was the end of it. My parents were alone now. No golden child, no allies, no power. For the first time in my life, I had one, and they could never hurt me again. I had to make sure they couldn't reach me. It was over. I'd already cut ties with them, but it wasn't enough. I couldn't leave any room for them to worm their way back in. So I did what I had to do. I changed my number. I moved. I made sure there were no loose ends for them to latch onto. I told only the people who truly mattered where I was. The rest, they didn't need to know. While I was putting distance between myself and that toxic past, Emma was doing the same thing, but in her own way. She started therapy. After everything that had happened, It was clear to both of us that she needed to rebuild, and she had to do it without our parents' influence hanging over her. Therapy helped her process years of being manipulated and gaslit. She slowly started finding herself again, and as expected, she fully cut ties with them. No more contact. No more emotional blackmail. Emma had made her peace with the fact that they were never going to change. The final push came when she publicly denounced them. She made a final statement online. Everything she had been holding back came out. She made it clear that they were the problem, that they were the ones who abandoned me, not the other way around. She said she couldn't be a part of their toxic cycle anymore. It was like a weight had been lifted, and yet their desperation didn't end. Our mother posted a sob story online. It was classic, the emotional plea, the crying, the poor me routine. She claimed to be the victim, writing about how her sons had abandoned her and how she was now suffamag without us. She begged for sympathy, hoping that the online world would rally behind her. But this time, no one bought it. People who had been on her side before started commenting, calling her out. The backlash was swift. They reminded her, in no uncertain terms, that she had abandoned me first. They weren't buying the poor mother act anymore, and that's when it hit the complete social collapse. Every corner of her life that had been propped up by lies came crashing down. Their friends, those who had defended them for so long, started to see them for what they really were. They had manipulated everyone. As the weeks went by, the fallout continued. I heard through some family members that they were drowning in debt. All those medical costs for Emma had taken a massive toll on their finances. The money they had been spending on trying to keep up appearances was no longer sustainable. It didn't take long for the news to spread, and with it came the complete isolation. No one, not a single person, stepped in to help them. I heard they had to sell everything, their house, their car, anything of value, just to stay afloat. The image of the family they had spent decades building was completely gone. And Emma, she had a fresh start. With the help of her therapy and her own resolve, Emma got a new job, started rebuilding her life piece by piece. She was learning how to live without their toxic influence. She was moving forward, no longer shackled by their manipulations. I was proud of her. But more than that, I was just glad to see her finally living for herself. As for me, I had already moved on completely. I realized I had won, and it wasn't just about getting away from them. It was about finally being free. They could no longer affect my life, and I was okay with that. But then, they tried one more time, one last email. It came out of nowhere. After weeks of silence, the subject line was a half-hearted apology mixed with an attempt to blame me for ruining their family. It was the same tired rhetoric. They still couldn't see the truth of what had happened. They still couldn't take responsibility. It was all about how I had wronged them, how I was the one who had ruined everything. I didn't bother reading it. I just deleted it. And with that, I was done. But Emma wasn't done yet. She made her final break. She legally changed her last name. It wasn't just a symbol. It was her way of erasing them completely from her life. The name they had tried to force on her, the name they had used to control her for so long, it was gone. Emma had taken the final step in cutting them off, and so had I. For the first time, I felt like I could truly breathe. They were gone completely. No more manipulations, no more lies, no more guilt trips. And I owed them nothing. I never had. It had been a year since I cut my parents out of my life, and everything was finally quiet. No more phone calls. No more emotional blackmail. No more people trying to guilt trip me. I had moved on. I was thriving. My career had taken off, and I had begun to rebuild relationships with people who actually cared about me. Friends, colleagues, and even a few family members who had stayed supportive all this time were still there for me. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Emma was doing even better. Her transformation over the past year was nothing short of remarkable. She was living independently, healthy, and in a better place than I ever imagined she could be. She had learned to stand on her own, free from the toxic grip of our parents. She was even making plans for her future, things I hadn't seen her do in years. As for our parents, the silence was deafening. They had completely disappeared. At first, I thought it was just them licking their wounds, unable to cope with the social fallout. But as the months went by, no one had heard from them. They had vanished from social media, from family mags, from every corner of the world we had once known. I had assumed they were just hiding in shame, unable to face the consequences of their actions. But that assumption was shattered when I received an anonymous email one evening titled, "You deserve to know the truth." The subject alone made my blood run cold. I hesitated before opening it. The message inside was more than I expected. It contained evidence, documents, bank statements, transactions that showed my parents had been hoarding money for years, money they could have used to support me when I was a child. Instead, they had selfishly kept it all for themselves, even as I was sent off to foster care and left to fend for myself. The email didn't just stop there. It also hinted at something I had never imagined, a forgotten inheritance. The sender claimed I might have legal rights to some of the money my parents had hoarded. They suggested there were assets I could claim, hidden away from the world, assets that might still be left behind. I sat there for a long time staring at the screen. Part of me didn't even want to believe it. But at the same time, I knew this was exactly the kind of thing they do. They were always about the money, always about control. I forwarded the email to Emma. Her reaction, shocked, but not surprised. She had always known that our parents had been selfish when it came to money. She'd seen it for years, their tendency to hoard to flaunt what they had while we struggled. It was almost like they wanted to make sure we never had a chance to succeed. Emma agreed we needed to look into it, so I reached out to a lawyer. I needed to know if I had any claim to the assets they had left behind. The lawyer reviewed everything and confirmed that, yes, there were some legal avenues I could explore. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about the money. It was about justice. Before I could even decide whether to take further action, my parents resurfaced. It wasn't much, just a desperate letter. The letter was full of pleas. They claimed they were in a financial bind, that they were facing extreme hardships, and they begged me for help. They tried to spin it as if I was their last hope. They even mentioned how I owed them because of everything they'd done for me in the past. The hypocrisy was overwhelming. It was almost laughable. Here they were, after everything they had done, abandoning me, manipulating me, and pushing me to the edge, and they were now begging for my help. The same people who had destroyed my childhood were now the ones asking for mercy. I thought about it for a moment, but then it hit me. Karma had come full circle. They had hoarded wealth while I suffered. They had everything they needed but chose not to help. And now they were reduced to begging for my assistance. I didn't respond to their letter. I didn't even acknowledge it. Because the truth was, they had already made their choices. They had already destroyed their own lives. I didn't owe them a single thing, not a cent, not a minute of my time, nothing. And that was when Emma made her final move. She legally severed her connection to them forever. She filed the paperwork, officially changing her last name and erasing any trace of them from her life. For her, it wasn't just about cutting ties. It was about claiming her own identity, free from the suffocating grip they had once had on her. With Emma's final cut, it became official. We were both free. As for our parents, they had nothing left. They had lost their reputation, their wealth, and any support they once had. No one was there to help them. And in the end, they were left to face the consequences of their greed and selfishness. And me, I had already won. Whether or not I chose to claim any money from their hoarded assets didn't matter anymore. I didn't need it. The real victory was in the freedom I had gained, freedom from the pain, the manipulation, and the toxic family dynamic. It was the perfect ending. Emma and I had finally rebuilt our sibling bond stronger than ever. We didn't need our parents to do that. We were free. And as for them, they faded into irrelevance, left with nothing but the ruins of their own choices. I was at peace, and I would never look back.